I always think it's a particular challenge in these situations, given that I both have samicha and have a Ph.D. Being able to turn a button on is a rather difficult kind of task, but it is really a great honor to be here today. And I am happy to speak about something that to a degree is oxymoronic, that is to say tradition and the future. Though I always like talking about the future in particular. I enjoy speaking about the future because there really is no way I can be disconfirmed empirically. That is to say, since no one can know what the future will be until you're there, there's really no way to say that someone is wrong about what they predict. Simultaneously, of course, there's no way to say if I'm right either. In just a few minutes to start the discussion, when I think about the issue of tradition and what it is we confront, I begin with some observations by the sociologist Peter Berger. Berger wrote two books in particular that I would mention here. One is entitled The Heretical Imperative, the other The Homeless Mind. Of course, his writings are voluminous, but there are two major features that I think are relevant to our conversation today. In The Heretical Imperative, what he points out is the very nature of the world in which we live is one where options increase at a dizzying kind of fashion. He neither applauds nor condemns this, but one needs to understand that the very nature of modernity, with the dizzying plurality of options and the multiplicity of identities that persons possess, is such that modernity, by definition, falsifies tradition. By definition, it falsifies tradition. What had previously been a matter of faith now becomes a matter of choice for virtually all individuals living in the world, certainly in the Western world, and to a large degree, certainly in a country like Israel as well. Simultaneously, though, he points out that with the heretical imperative, what emerges is the homeless mind. That is to say, that just as modernity, with its many options and choices, falsifies tradition and gives you more options, at the very same time, it leaves people feeling bereft of community. It leaves people feeling that they have a sense of homelessness. Consequently, in the modern world, part of what modernity does is it simultaneously destroys tradition, while on the other hand, promoting a new creation of tradition. And I would argue that in history, this has been a constant, so that in modern Judaism today, you have, as it were, antipodean trends. You have more individuals leaving the tradition than was ever true in an earlier generation. Simultaneously, there are people who seek tradition, and we see this certainly both in the United States, Israel, and to a large degree Europe. The question or the challenge, it seems to me, as we think about the Jewish future, is how is it that we have traditions speak in meaningful cadences? And one of the great tasks, I think, that we confront is how is it that we take an ancient tradition which roots us in the world and that gives us a sense of our own identity as a community, and how do we have that tradition speak in meaningful ways to persons so that individuals will see tradition as meaningful. When we live in a state where 40,000 conversions conducted under Orthodox auspices can be mavutalim, can be canceled as a result of a ruling by another rabbinic court, and you have a modern nation state where millions of Jews live, and you have a classical definition that's understood in the narrowest of terms, how can tradition then continue to speak in a meaningful way for people in this kind of situation? What is it that tradition is going to address? Within classical halakha, there is a phrase that Yaakov Emden, the Noda B'Yehuda, and others have cited, Ein Meshivin al Adrush, which I think generally means that one, in fact, doesn't issue halachic rulings on the basis of imagination, that is to say, Agadah or Midrash. But the reality is that the Midrash within our tradition contains ultimately the ethical values and teachings, and it seems to me that just the opposite needs to be true, that in fact we live in a world where indeed the overarching values inherent in Jewish tradition have to be promoted and made primary if Judaism is going to speak in meaningful cadences to Jews in the world today. In this sense, then, I would quote the work, a favorite work of mine, by Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, the former chief Sephardic rabbi of Tel Aviv, who once wrote, Misha choshev shahalacha hi kfuah, va'en listot mimena yamin u'smol, to'eh ma'od, adrabah, ein yomishut kak mishuta shel halacha. Anyone who thinks the Jewish tradition is frozen and one cannot deviate from it in any way to speak in meaningful terms, is in great error. Rather, Judaism has survived because Jews have had the courage throughout the generations to draw upon the tradition while simultaneously engaging in what one might call a sort of creative betrayal of that tradition so that the tradition can continue to speak in meaningful cadences for persons today. In the end, the way in which I would understand tradition in the future is supplied by Ronald Dworkin, the legal philosopher. I'll let Yedidya comment on this later. But Dworkin compares law to a chain novel. He says that in fact we have inherited a tradition, but simultaneously each generation is required to have that tradition speak in meaningful kinds of terms. So the obligation we have as Jews is to both be rooted in the tradition while simultaneously allowing that tradition to speak in meaningful and new ways to Jews in the modern world, addressing the modern situation, so that we can at the same time retain our identity and simultaneously be able to speak to people in light of the conditions of the modern situation. Thank you.